What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are here with some more UFC DFS picks and lineup advice, MMA tips and strategies and sleepers for UFC Vegas 86 DraftKings and FanDuel. We have Joe Pyfer versus Jack Hermansson. Welcome. I am Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMA DFS.com, to help us break down all 14 of these fights. Jake, what's up, man? Long week for you, I imagine.
Yeah, man, these big cards, 14 fights, five newcomers, three and a half late replacements, if you count Andre Feely, who had like 3 weeks to prepare. Yeah, man, busy week. We haven't had one like this in a while. Yeah, lots of work.
Tons of work for charting purposes, for analysis purposes, but we got it all covered for you, whether it's at MMADFS.com or OccupyFantasy.com or right here in this video. What we're going to do, break down the main event from a betting and DFS perspective, Pyfer versus Hermansson. We will talk about those five newcomers, give backgrounds, resumes, fighting styles for all five of those fighters. We'll play good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup for those fighters that have less than 4 fights in the UFC. Give some context to their DraftKings points per game, their fight logs, etc. And then we'll close out the show with our favorite underdog fantasy prop of the slate, a fight that you have to target in DFS. Whoever wins is likely to score extremely well, and our stream parlay of the week. Before we get into all of that, Jake, I do want to say, you mentioned it briefly, 14 fights. This is definitely different than most of the slates we've been dealing with. And I must say, as I was building lineups before we started doing this video, when we have 11 fights, 12 fights, sometimes even 13 fights, you have to put a concerted effort in to get different, especially in smaller contests and in larger contests. But here, you can basically build however you want. And unless you're just building with the top 6 or 8 fighters, it's really not that hard to get different. So what is your advice for people out there who are playing and haven't really played that many larger slates like this?
Yeah, I mean, what you said, man, it's way easier to create unique lineups. I was just looking at like the last 14 fight cards that only had one 5 round fight on them. We only had one of those that had more than 6 dupes. And that one had 0 low-owned fighters and 3 high-owned fighters, and it only left $200 of salary on the table. So yeah, like you said, like as long as you don't just play all of the chalky guys and not leave much salary, it's really easy to create lineups that have 6 or less, and even unique. We had 5 uniques of those 13, and 2 of those uniques they spent the full salary.
Yeah.
2 of them only left 300 on the table. It's really easy. Like just don't hammer all the top plays and use all the salary, and you can basically just play the guys you like, play the top guys. It is harder with 28 fighters on the card. Obviously, getting the right combinations is the key, and we have a lot of good options. But yeah, man, play your guys.
Yeah, and to that point, you don't necessarily need the optimal on a 14 fight card as you would on a 10 fight, 11 fight, even 12 fight card. So nailing the low owned plays is key. Before we get into all that again, just for those who aren't subscribed to either of our sites, who do you have as the 3 highest owned fighters on the card?
So it's Pyfer, Vieira, and Jeremiah Wells. But Jeremiah Wells there's a pretty big gap. I mean, honestly, there's a big gap between all those. Pyfer is like way ahead of everyone, and then Vieira is going to be really popular. And then Wells is kind of leading the pack of the kind of middle owned guys.
Which is crazy because normally we have like 40% owned fighters, a couple more 30%.
Right.
So you really don't have to limit yourself that much at all. So let's get into this matchup between Pyfer and Hermansson. If it's rare, but we could have actually included Pyfer in the good fighter, bad fighter segment later because he only has 3 fights in the UFC, yet he is in a main event here. So how do you expect this fight to play out? What does it mean for DFS?
Yeah, man, pretty crazy to see a guy with 3 UFC fights get a main event spot. But we've seen it a couple times, and here we are. So we've got Pyfer, 27 years old. He's finished all 3 of his UFC opponents in under a round and a half. I mean, clearly he's Dana White's guy. Like he kind of went under Dana's wing before, during, after Contender Series. He went on Contender Series twice. He had that freak arm injury against Dustin Stoltzfus that a lot of people were saying he wouldn't even come back from that. Pyfer said the doctors gave him a 30% chance to come back. Took like a year or so off, came back, got a knockout on the second trip on the Contender Series, comes into the UFC. He's getting very favorable matchups. Obviously, they're trying to build the guy up, but he's doing the job. He got 2 knockouts in his first 2 fights, albeit against opponents that didn't have very good jaws and they were set up for knockouts. And then he gets a submission against the one-dimensional striker who was a little bit undersized. So again, set up for Pyfer to succeed, but that's what they're doing. They're trying to showcase him, and they're kind of doing it again here with Hermansson, who's a 35-year-old ranked guy, but hasn't fought in 14 months. Has been pretty inconsistent. I think it's like 8 straight fights where Hermansson's bounced between wins and losses. So he's been a guy that's been struggling with consistency. Hermansson's gone just 1-3 in UFC 5-round fights, losing the last 3 of those. They've been building guys up off of him. Strickland beat Hermansson. So it seems like if you want to build someone up with a ranked fighter, which obviously they do in Pyfer, Hermansson's kind of the guy that you throw out there because he's not a power puncher. He's not like an insane wrestler, but he's good everywhere. So he's going to test you, but he's not necessarily going to break you. Unless, I will say the caveat, we don't know what Pyfer's cardio is like because he's been in one fight in his career that made it past the 8-minute mark, and that was his only decision win. He's never been to the championship round. So the way Hermansson would break Pyfer here would be, just to outlast him, would be to out cardio, would be to leg kick him to death, basically. We saw Pyfer get his leg beat up in that last fight against Alhassan, and it didn't even take many leg strikes before Pyfer started kind of walking awkwardly on it. And that's when he finally took him down and went for the submission. So I think that's the main concern, is the durability and the cardio on Pyfer's side of things, which are both unknown. We haven't seen him take much damage. We haven't seen him extended. And that's where Hermansson can come in and land a bunch of leg kicks and maybe force it into the later rounds. But that's where the fact that this is at the apex comes into play. And I think they did that on purpose. Pyfer's kind of a crowd guy, but they put him in the apex against Hermansson because if you put Hermansson in a 30-foot cage, he can dance around and leg kick you all day. So I think the apex definitely favors Pyfer. So it's just one more thing where the UFC is just trying to help this guy out. It seems like it's set up for him to finish Hermansson, who's been prone to getting finished in the past, especially against big power guys. That's kind of been where Hermansson struggled, is whenever you put him up against a guy like Cannonier, Delize, one of these big power guys, that's when he gets finished. Now, Thiago Santos, like these are the guys that are finishing Hermansson where Hermansson's finding success against guys that aren't just going to physically dominate him. So I think it is a good matchup for Pyfer here to get a finish. But if he doesn't, it's going to get really dicey. Although I feel like we were saying the same thing in the Duplessis-Strickland fight where everyone was like, oh, it's either Duplessis in the first 2 rounds or Strickland's going to take over. And then we saw Duplessis showcase that he could go 5 rounds. So who knows, man? Maybe Pyfer's been claiming that he trains 5-5s all the time. So maybe this is a showcase for him to show that. You could look at it at that angle too. But I think for DFS, we're basically playing Pyfer for his finishing ability. And if he somehow, goes in a longer fight and scores well, that's just a bonus. But I think we basically want to be playing him for his finishing ability. And he's got a 57% inside the distance implied chances here. So, I mean, he does have a really high chance of getting a finish. The field is playing him appropriately on those lines. And with Hermansson, he's so cheap that if he does win, it's harder to see him getting left out. So, I mean, whoever wins the fight should score well. Obviously, Pyfer's expensive, so he'll have a lot of competition from a scoring perspective. So he could still get priced out pretty easily. That's the way the fight fails in tournaments. But he's got good upside. So I think he'll be competitive with the high price guy in a win, but it's definitely not a lock. In the low risk, I'm still stacking it, but it's not the best low risk week ever. Although, I mean, every time we say that, it ends up being a 5-round decision where, they score 150, 200 combined points. So it's hard to even, say that with a straight face anymore. But I mean, theoretically, Pyfer's lower volume. If he gets, a 2nd round finish, he might score like 100 points and Hermansson scores like 10. And then that's far from ideal for stacking. But I don't know. It's not the best dog slate ever. So I think you stack it. And Hermansson's kind of either a sacrifice play or a safety valve, one of the two.
Fair enough. And for FanDuel, do either one of these guys look better or worse over there for those viewers who are playing on FanDuel?
I mean, I think Hermansson has the potential to put up a bunch of volume in a win. I don't think Hermansson's going to finish Pyfer early. So I would say that, he's $13 on FanDuel. If he lands, 140 significant strikes, then, I think that goes a long way. Pyfer is not a big volume guy, but I don't think either guy is going to wrestle a ton, which is the big detractor on FanDuel. So I think they're both fine.
Fair enough. And I guess my question to you is 14 fights, as I just said 2 minutes ago, we don't need to get that different. But when you have the one guy who's 40, 50% owned, like Pyfer is expected to be on DraftKings, and he is lower volume, shouldn't wrestle that much, and there's a lot of competition. To me, it seems like an easy way to get different and take out potentially half the field if you can find one or two of these other fighters that could just even match. Because here's the thing with 14 fights, as I said, you don't need to be optimal. If Pyfer puts up 105, 110, but you don't play him and you have a couple other fighters that score 100, 102, you can still win if your lower owned guys outscore everyone else, right? You don't have to be optimal necessarily. Then the upside is if Pyfer loses, right? He's still only minus 290 or minus 300, whatever he is. Or second, third round, or lower volume decision, he scores, 90, 95, and now you're beating the rest of the field. So that's my line of thinking. What do you think about that in large field?
No, I mean I think that makes a ton of sense. We have a lot of expensive guys here that can score well, and I think that it's going to be hard for Piper to outscore all of them. So like Piper's kind of like you would say the safer option because he's got the higher inside the distance line. But yeah, no, I totally agree that it's great leverage to not play him and to play one of these other guys. And for sure, I think that one or two of the other expensive options are going to outscore him,
For sure. I mean,
regardless of whether he wins or not.
for sure. And he seems like a great small field play, right? We know he's likely to score 80 plus, which is exactly what you're looking for in smaller contests. But as you'll see here in a few moments, once we get to some of these newcomers and these other fighters with less fights in UFC, Oki, even Luke Boomy, who we talk about every single time she's on the card as a low-owned 9K option. Marcos, Pratis, Rodriguez, Clark, Brychek, like all these guys, all these fighters can outscore Pyfer. So definitely it's a great GPP slate, which is in direct contrast with how you feel about low risk, which makes a lot of sense. So now speaking of these newcomers, we do have five. So let's start with the first fight of the night until the last fight of the night and talk about these five newcomers. And we can be brief here, Jake, since there are five of them. But just talk to me about what their fighting style is, their strength of schedule, how we expect them to fare in their debut. And we'll start with Hyder Amil in the second fight of the night.
Yeah, man, Hyder's coming in 33 years old, so not a young guy by any means, but undefeated, 8-0 with 5 finishes, still pretty limited career. He's coming off a decision win on Contender Series, but so I think this is where there's a really big edge on this slate. Is that's his only fight on UFC stats is that one Contender Series fight, and he was defending takedowns for the entire fight. So it's super low volume. His stats look terrible, and anyone that watched that, or even better, just looked at his numbers or projections that come from those numbers, is going to think that he doesn't have much scoring potential. And he's expensive. He's up there at 8,700. When in reality, this guy's a super high volume brawler that just pushes a crazy pace that basically exhausts himself and his opponents in all of his matches, which is great for DFS because you want high volume and you want to have an exhausted opponent because that's when we can get a real scoring ceiling is when one guy's exhausted and the other isn't, and you can just get a fighter raining down ground and pound and rack up 80 strikes leading up to a finish. So that's the style of fight, and he's going to be low owned. The numbers are misleading. So I really love this guy. It wouldn't be shocking at all to see this end in a decision, but I think it could be super high volume. Hopefully we just, we get a bounce going our way and we don't get, just like a complete bust of a fight because it looks like a gem. Both guys are low owned and it's absolutely the pace. Just everything sets up well for DFS on this guy's fight.
Great analysis, and just another reason why we do like this slate for GPPs. Yes, there are 14 fights, but when you have five newcomers, it introduces a lot of variance and a lot of unknowns that the field generally isn't looking to research outside of just looking at their betting odds or maybe their contender series stats. So good insight there, Jake. Next, we have scrolling on up, we have two newcomers. This is a very late replacement. We have Bolaji Oki. He was slated to fight Damir Hadjovic. He dropped out. They brought in Timmy Kwamba, who literally just fought last weekend, and he's up a weight class. And I think this is similar to and this is only if you watch the fight, I believe. If you watched Kwamba's Contender Series fight, you may think he's this incredible boxer, where every single other fight, at least that I watched, Jake, was not like that. It was a completely different fighter. So talking about Oki, talking about Kwamba, the line movement in this fight, what are these fighters like? Just break it all down for me.
Yeah, man, Oki is 28 years old, 8-1, 6 finishes, coming off a round one knockout in Contender Series, and he faced a really hyped up Muay Thai striker that had a win over Giga Chikadze in Contender Series, and the dude made it look easy. Like he just finished him in round one. They were hyping up his opponent. Like Oki was a underdog in that fight. He looked great, man. Throws nasty body shots, really powerful, solid takedown defense. He can wrestle when he needs to, but he's generally not looking to. He's generally looking to keep it standing and just destroy his opponents with really vicious combos. Does a good job targeting the liver, just like a powerhouse puncher. Looks like a really exciting prospect. Honestly, he's gonna make for some fun fights. And go watch his weigh-in, man. The guy is a scary human. He's an absolute beast. And he's a career 155er. And then in comes Kwamba on Tuesday. And like you said, he just fought last Friday. He's coming up from 145 for the first time in his career on a few days' notice. He turned 25 on Thursday, so like he was 24 at the start of the week. 8-4 with 4 finishes. He fought to like a close decision on Contender Series, going against the Canadian grappler that was trying to take him down a bunch, was kicking his leg. I thought Kwambo's striking looked pretty good on there. Maybe like you said, better than on the regional scene, but overall he seems like an improving prospect. Trains in Vegas, so he was on standby right there. Like he didn't have to travel or anything for this. He was just up the road. He seems like a good striker, but it's a really brutal spot, man. I mean, just everything going against you. Short notice, up a weight class, just fought, going against a really tough opponent. I mean, just everything going against him. I was surprised that Oki isn't like a negative like 300 or 400 favorite here. And I was even more surprised when the line came down some. But after weigh-ins, the line actually started going back in Oki's favor. I think people realized like, all right, this guy's actually a beast, and Kwamba's a little smaller. I mean, Kwamba's not like tiny or anything. It's not going to be like a massive size difference, but I think the difference is, muscle versus not cutting a bunch of weight. So really tough spot for Kwamba. Maybe we'll be interested in him in his second fight, but yeah, man, it seems like a get your foot in the door, don't mind losing spot for Kwamba.
And I will say, just as we point this out, because Oki was scheduled to fight at the beginning of the week, he was in the DraftKings pricing and is priced as the highest priced fighter on the card. Kwamba was not in the player pool. So once this fight materialized, they added Kwamba at his appropriate price based on the money line. Now, Oki is technically overpriced based on his odds to win. Don't necessarily think it'll impact his ownership too much because of his inside the distance numbers, but certainly lower owned than he would be if he was a few $100s cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. He should be 8,700. He's 9,500. I do think that he would have been like 35, 40% owned if he was appropriately priced. And now he's going to be, even projected around 30%. So, I mean, yeah, good call there. He is overpriced, and that will bring him down some for sure.
All right, moving on. Next, we have Carlos Prates, who at $9,200, a big favorite here against Trevin Giles. Talking about Prates, his fighting style, his strength of schedule.
Yeah, man, 30 years old, 17-6 with 15 finishes. So more experience than a lot of your typical debuting fighters. Coming off a second round knockout win on Contender Series. Really dangerous Muay Thai guy, but he's also a BJJ black belt. Just he has K1 experience, tons of combat experience. The guy's really long, super long legs. He swings them around like baseball bats, just leg kicking, body kicking. Then once people bring their hands down, he's going for head kick knockouts. I think he's a really impressive striker. We'll see how he handles opponents at the UFC level who might be better at figuring out how to go at someone that's so kick heavy in their game. But man, he's really good, and he's got really good size, really good power, good speed, good movement. He's an interesting prospect, and he comes in with a lot of experience. So I think he's going to hit the ground running. But we'll see. I think for DFS, he is a little bit lower volume. He's not going to add much in terms of wrestling, so he's very dependent on getting knockouts, and he needs like a well-timed finish. Like an early second-round knockout isn't going to score especially well because he's not going to have a ton of volume, and he's not really going to add anything in terms of wrestling.
And it does make it tough at his price tag, and his ownership will probably be reflective of his high inside the distance number. So it is a tricky spot to try to get right in tournaments. A guy you probably want to play if you're not playing Pyfer, a guy you maybe want to fade if you are playing Pyfer, if you're thinking along those lines. And to your point about his BJJ, I think it was one of his regional fights where you see this guy striking and limbs coming from everywhere, and you're like, all right, let me just take this guy down and stop this. I can't remember who it was. They took him down, and he started throwing up submissions, and legs were going everywhere, and they're like, well, shit, I can't do this either. So it was kind of a tough road for opposing fighters on the regional scene against Prates. Finally, we have the final debuting fighter is Robert Brychek, the third to last fight of the night against Ihor Potieria. Brychek from Poland. Talk to me about him, Jake. Looks like a lot of knockouts on his record, but what is his fighting style, strength of schedule?
Yeah, another guy with pretty good experience. He's the one debuter that is not coming off Contender Series. They just put him right in there because he's already 33, 17-5 with 12 finishes. He's landed 5 straight first round knockouts. Just a Polish power puncher. We've seen a few of these guys in the past. I mean, that's what he's good at. He's really good at boxing, really good at knocking people out. Allegedly a BJJ black belt, but really hasn't shown any sort of grappling game. He's just finishing everyone on the feet. So yeah, he relies on his striking for DFS. Obviously we're looking for guys that can wrestle too, but he's shown that he doesn't need to. He's just going in there and knocking everyone out. We'll see how that translates to the UFC level. We'll see how he handles when people try to wrestle him. I mean, he's been fighting, in Europe, and basically all these dudes are just been like, yeah, we're just gonna, we're gonna be in a boxing match, basically, and someone's getting knocked out, and that's how basically all of his fights, like all of his last 7 fights, are basically the same way, where they're just straight up boxing matches. But man, really good matchup here. He's going against Ihor Pateria, whatever his name is, Ihor the Donkey. Who's cutting down to 185 for just the second time in his career, took the fight on short notice, missed weight, looked like absolute shit on the scales, has been finished in all 3 of his UFC losses, just everything going in Brychek's favor. So I think you have to like this spot, and you have to like his upside, considering that most of his fights end in, within a couple minutes, and he's got 2 in under a minute in his last 5 wins.
Certainly the spot to do it in if you're going to ask for any matchup in your debut. All right, moving on. Let's talk about those fighters with less than 4 fights in the UFC. As a quick reminder, if you're not already, make sure you check out MMADFS.com. Jake writes up every single fight for betting and DFS in the sheet. He also has premium content, betting, DFS, everything you need. Go check out his site. And OccupyFantasy.com, we'll talk about some of the tools here in a little bit if you're looking for that extra edge for UFC DFS. Now, Jake, again, we'll start from the first fight of the night until the last fight of the night. And again, this is very brief. Context. Is this fighter actually good or bad? And is this the good or bad matchup? Daniel Marcos, just 2 fights in the UFC.
Yeah, I think the jury's still out on him. He's a good striker, but he doesn't offer much else. So he's kind of average, but it's a good matchup, man. Arichi Lang absorbs a ton of damage, averaging 5.56 significant strikes absorbed per minute. And that's even with he's faced several grapplers. So we saw Jeff Molina basically just go nuclear on this guy in the 3rd round and land 100 strikes in 1 round. So we're always looking to target his fights because they can be super high volume. And Marcos is a pure striker. So if he looks better than he looked against Davy Grant, because he looked terrible against Davy Grant, which is why I can't call him a good fighter. But it's a high upside matchup for sure.
All right, next, we did talk about the Emil Garcia fight, but just a little more context. Garcia is 0-3, 3 decisions in the UFC. Is he better than his record indicates? And I believe you think, I don't know if this is a good matchup, but maybe a better matchup for DFS scoring for Fernie?
No, I mean, I think it's a good matchup because Emil is just a brawler who's looking to push a crazy pace. Typically on the feet, he will look for takedowns. But I mean, Garcia's faced 2 straight wrestlers, and he's been dominated on the mat. He's looked absolutely terrible. He looked terrible on the feet against Journey Newsome. So, no, Garcia's a bad fighter, but I do think it's a great matchup for DFS. I think it's super high pace, super high volume. Garcia stepped in on short notice up a weight class. Both of those are big red flags. He's also probably he has to be fighting for his job unless he got some secret deal for stepping in on short notice. I mean, he's 0-3. It should be the final fight on his deal. It's kind of weird he even took it, but maybe he's like, just don't give me a wrestler. I'll fight whoever. He's a bad fighter in a good matchup, though.
All right, next we have Bogdan Guskov, whose 1 fight in the UFC was a quick first-round submission loss to Volkan Ozdemir. He's up against Zach Pauga. Both these guys have less than 4 fights in the UFC. Is either one good or bad? Is this a good matchup or a bad matchup for either?
They're both bad, but it's a good matchup for both of them just based on the way that Bogdan fights, where he's just a kill or be killed fighter. He's hands low, going for a first-round finish, or else he's going to get finished himself. So, I mean, Pauga is kind of the opposite. He's like a decision grinder, although we saw him open things up a little bit more against Modestas Bukauskas in his last fight. Still ended up losing that controversial decision. Still wouldn't have scored well in a decision, but I think anytime Bogdan's going to be in a fight, we're going to be targeting those fights to some extent.
Fair enough. Moving on, we have Bruna Brazil as one of the largest underdogs, if not the largest underdog on the card. She's up against Luke Boomy. She's 1-1 in the UFC. Is she good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup against Luke Boomy?
Yeah, from a like an overall MMA perspective, I think Brazil's bad because she's like a good striker, but she's a bad wrestler. She doesn't handle pressure well. She's been knocked out 3 times. We were even looking to target Shanna Bannon almost against her, and she's not good. So
Yeah.
like Loma, this is a great matchup for Loma. I think it's a bad matchup for Brazil, and I think I'm still calling Brazil a bad fighter here, even though she's got good striking, good size for the division.
Yeah, that's fair enough. All right. Next, we have Darius Flowers, who tough matchup in his debut. His debut was short notice. Am I correct on that?
It was, yeah.
Okay, against Jake Matthews, very tough. Now he's up against the aging Michael Johnson. Is Flowers good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup?
So I think Flowers is bad. I think he's got bad cardio. I think he's got like one good round in him, but I think he has bad cardio, bad IQ. He was fighting like at 170. He's even fought at 185. He's fought at 195 before. He's cutting down to 155 for the first time in his career, which adds tons of volatility to this matchup. He initially missed weight by a quarter pound. They gave him extra time to keep cutting, and he did make weight. He didn't look very good. Everything he says is like a red flag. He was talking about how the reason he kept gassing out was because of the elevation in Las Vegas. It's like, what are you talking about? Las Vegas is like 2,000 feet above sea level. Like, no one ever complains about elevation at Vegas except for this guy.
Right.
I think he was just making excuses because he has terrible cardio. But he throws like good combinations early on in fights. Maybe that's why he gasses out. I just He turns into a pumpkin in the second round in like all of his fights. So I can't call him a good fighter, but I do think he has upside. He has knockout upside in the first round, maybe early in round two. And Michael Johnson's 37 years old, coming off a knockout loss, like a bad knockout loss. Michael Johnson just finds ways to lose fights he should win, and he wins fights he should lose. So I mean, this is definitely a fight that Michael Johnson should win, which means he'll probably lose and get randomly knocked out. But yeah, so I guess it's a good matchup for Flowers, theoretically.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. All right, and finally, we have Ihor Potieria, bad fighter. I don't think you're going to disagree with that. Good matchup?
I don't think it's a good matchup. I
All right.
think I think it's a bad matchup. I think that Eeyore is going to get quickly knocked out here. I think that I don't think Eeyore has very good wrestling, which is theoretically how he would win this fight against a striker. I just don't see it, man. I think he's going to get pieced up. I think the boxing of Bobby Breeze is going to be too nasty, and Eeyore is going to get quickly put to sleep here. But we'll see.
Bad fighter, bad matchup it is. All right, moving on. 3 segments left. They will be quick. Underdog fantasy side that you have to take. Fight the target in DFS, stream parlay of the week. Underdog fantasy reminder, if you're not already, they have pick'ems, they have tons of best ball, and we'll continue doing best ball content for all sports throughout the spring and summer. So make sure you sign up. If you aren't already using promo code OCCUPY, get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. Use that extra $100 to parlay some props, to play some best ball contests, do what you can. It's free money. So, Jake, favorite underdog fantasy side for the slate?
Yeah, I really like Hyder Emil over 51.5 significant strikes. I think he could hit that in the first round potentially.
Lots of high praise here for Emil, at least as far as at least as far as his sneaky upside. So hopefully everyone out there is paying attention. All right, fight that you have to target in DFS. We have 14 to pick from. You're going to go with an under the radar one. You're going to go with a higher profile one. Which fight do you think whoever wins is likely to be in the optimal lineup?
Yeah, I'm staying on brand here. I'm sticking with Hyder Emil once again with Fernie Garcia, man. Their ownership is crazy low. I just think that's like a dream spot when like 90% of the field has no clue about the potential of a fight, and we can get the combined ownership at like 25%, and
That's crazy.
whoever wins has a massive floor and a pretty solid ceiling, especially if we get a finish. But I think the floor is insane, specifically just based on volume. I mean, we just need like not something stupid where like Fernie Garcia randomly runs away for 15 minutes. Like, yeah, it's like the only way the fight busts.
Jake cannot say it in any other way. So if you watch this video, you know the high upside, low owned plays, plural, of the card. For other high owned low own or high upside, low own plays, make sure you check out the Occupy model. We rank every fighter, FanDuel, and DraftKings using charted data and other proprietary data. Has Jake's projected ownership for DraftKings in there, our projected ownership for FanDuel as well. You can read the daily plug, OccupyFantasy.com, that Jake writes with his top plays, best bets, lineup construction tips for various contest types. I think, Jake, we don't talk about this enough, but I do think that is the most overlooked section of the daily plug is the lineup construction section. We get so many people asking us, how do I play this for this contest? Literally a roadmap in there, and it's based on the fighters on the card. It really is a very templated format, even if you're new to UFC DFS, to be successful.
Yeah, man, for sure. We try to make it easy on people. There's a lot of good nuggets in there. And then, afterwards, everyone's like, so who are the good plays?
Yeah, exactly. 100%. So, all right, let's close it out with stream parlay of the week. I pick a side, total or prop. Jake does as well. We hit last week, right?
We did plus 1160 Medeiros decision at plus 320. We parlay. That was my pick, and you picked Garimbo KO or decision at plus 200. If you bet $20 on that, you would have won back like 250.
Hell yeah. Let's try to run it back this week. I think we have a little bit of a safer option, not necessarily you can call these types of parlays safe, but certainly in terms of odds. I think you feel the same, Jake. It's not the greatest betting card. It's a fantastic DFS card. Just looking at the matchup here, and mostly to hedge my bets against potentially fading him in DFS. I haven't made this decision yet, but I'm going to go with Carlos Prates by KO, nasty KO artist. Seems really like to get a KO within 3 rounds here. So Prates KO, it's nearly a coin flip, so not the best odds.
Yeah, no, I like it though, man. Giles has been finished in, I believe, all of his losses. Yeah, all 5 of his career losses, he's been finished, and I just think they're setting Prates up here for a knockout to really like get his name known.
And then
So I like that, man.
Like Dana called him Anderson Silva or something like that, right? Like he compared him to
Yeah.
something crazy. So clearly they're trying to set him up with a highlight reel finish here.
Yeah, they're trying to build this guy up for sure. Like they were talking about how they were trying to find the next Brazilian superstar. They are for sure trying to build this guy up. This is a great matchup to do it. We've seen a bunch of guys get built up against Trevin Giles, whether it was Bonfim, Duplessis. Just they're
Giles, like, sign me up.
Giles is, yeah, exactly. So I like it, man. At plus 105. Honestly, a lot of books have that at negative, so I think that's a good line too. I'm going to pair it with Wells' decision at plus 260. I think Max Griffin is a really tough guy to put away, but I do think Wells is going to find wrestling success. And I think that's his path to victory, man. I think that line it should be shorter. So if we combine those together, it's plus 638 on the parlay.
All right. A small electric vehicle we can purchase with that type of parlay. But hey, if we hit it again, we got the money from last week. We can put it together towards a nicer ride. So that'll do it for this video. Again, make sure you check out MMADFS.com, OccupyFantasy.com. Jake's on Twitter at DFS_MMA. I am at Brian Jester FF, also at Occupy Fantasy. If you're not already, make sure you are subscribed to our channel here on YouTube. It is free to do so. Just click the subscribe button below the video. You'll get notified whenever we go live or upload any videos. We're doing these UFC videos for the rest of the year. Anytime there are 12 or more fights and or it is a pay-per-view card. Sometimes we pre-record them like this one on Friday evening. Sometimes we go live on Saturday. Just depends on the scheduling. So being subscribed to the channel is the best way to get notified when those videos are coming out. And if you like it, give us a thumbs up. That lets us know to continue making these videos. Any questions, we will monitor the channel throughout the evening and afternoon. So drop a comment below the video with any questions. Discord's also probably the best way to reach us, chat with other members of the community, OccupyFantasy.com/Discord. So for Jake, I'm Brian. Thank you for listening and good luck at UFC Vegas 86.